So we're going to try this next problem, which we're going to practice using the chain rule in the function notation version. So here I have a function h of x that's the sine of x squared plus x. So to use this function version notation of the chain rule, we're going to need to be able to recognize what is the inside function and what is the outside function. What are the two functions that have been composed together? So I'll write a little note here. This is the answer to part A, but I haven't really given you enough room. Sorry. I think the outside function is sine. So see, I have f here is outside. So f of x equals sine of x. And g of x, sometimes if you look inside parentheses or inside some sort of grouping symbol, you're going to be able to find what your inside function is. G of x in this case is x squared plus x. So once I have that figured out, I can use this function notation version of the chain rule. For part B, I've been asked to find h prime of x. I don't have enough room. I can't write small enough to fit in there, but this is what I'm expecting you to write. I would start by saying h prime of x is, I'm just going to copy the chain rule, f prime of g of x times g prime of x. So that's the derivative of f of g of x times the derivative of g of x. So now that I know these two functions, I'm going to be able to rewrite this chain rule using this f and this g from this function. So h prime of x is going to equal, it's f prime with the same g still inside. Well, what's f prime of x? F prime of x is cosine of x. I'll even write that down. F prime of x, if f of x is sine x, f prime of x is cosine x. So I want f prime of g. That means I want cosine of, here's g, x squared plus x. That's cosine with the middle left the same, the inside left the same, x squared plus x. That's my f prime of g of x. Here's my multiplication dot times. I need g prime of x. Well, that's not too bad. We're experts at taking derivatives of polynomial functions now. I'm just going to write it on the side here in case that helps you know where I'm coming from. G prime of x, the derivative of x squared is 2x. The derivative of x is 1. So it's going to be, and this whole thing has to go in parentheses, 2x plus 1. So that's my answer to part B. H prime of x is the cosine of x squared plus x times the quantity 2x plus 1. So for part C, I've been asked to find h prime of 0. You couldn't have tried to tell me h prime of 0 until you figured out h prime of x. Now that we know h prime of x, I'm going to replace all the x's with zeros. And that's going to equal the cosine of 0 squared plus 0 times 2 times 0 plus 1. I'm going to need a little extra room. Hold on. So I made myself some room up here. H prime of 0 is cosine of 0 squared plus 0 times 2 times 0 plus 1. Well, let me come back up here. Whoops. That's the cosine of, well, 0 squared plus 0 is 0 times 2 times 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. What is the cosine of 0? It's 1 times 1 equals 1. Final answer, h prime of 0 equals 1. All right, guys, you feeling patient? The example that comes next actually comes from composing 4 functions together. So let's just step back and let's do this problem. I wrote it in for you, so let's do this one together. This one only has 3 functions composed together. We'll do a 4 function composition together in class tomorrow. I think this is a better one to start with. So a more normal notation for this problem would be y equals cosine squared of 3x. It means the same thing, and the second one is what you would find printed on a test, but this is a good moment to stop and remember what that notation means. This means if I gave you some value of x and asked you to substitute it in to tell me what y is, the first thing you would do is multiply x times 3. The next thing you would do is to take the cosine of that result, and the thing you would do after that is to square the result of your cosine. So squaring is the outermost function, the outside function. So I was going to make a little list. So I might say that y is equal to u squared. But what was the thing that was getting squared? U is equal to cosine of 3x. Let's call that cosine of v. And what was v? What was getting cosine? V is equal to 3x. So y is a function of x. It just goes through all these stages before you finally get to the x. So we said that y prime, or dy dx, is going to equal, so let's use the derivative notation version of the chain rule. So it's going to be dy du times du dx. Well, it's going to be, what's the derivative of y with respect to u? It's 2u times, what's du dx? I have a problem because u is not a function of x. So I'm going to write du dx. And then I'm going to give myself a little bit of room, and I'm going to try to figure out what du dx is. Well, I can use the chain rule. Whoops, one more time. There's the pen. Du dx. U is not a function of x. U is a function of v. So I'm going to use the chain rule here. Du dx is going to equal the derivative of u with respect to the variable that's there, which is v, times the derivative of v with respect to the variable I really want. So du dx is du dv times dv dx. This I might be able to figure out. Du dx is, well, du dv, the derivative of u with respect to v, u is cosine of v, this is going to be negative sine of v, times, can I take the derivative of v with respect to x? I sure can. The derivative of v with respect to x is 3. So I could try to, I'm going to have to simplify this eventually, so let's see what we have here. I'm going to take this whole mess, come up here. So here's what I have so far. dy dx is going to equal 2u times du dx, but I just said du dx is negative sine of v, should be a times sign, times 3. So negative sine of v times 3. So dy dx, 2u, so that's 2 times cosine of 3x, times the negative sine of v was 3x times this 3. So especially when you see it written that way, and of course feel free to not simplify this, you can sort of see it as the derivative of the outside function. The derivative of something squared is 2 times the something, times the derivative of the inside of that original function, times the derivative, that's this one, times the derivative of that inside. So you can see how the chain rule, the functions line up in a chain. So I'll just do one of these to, just in case you feel like you want to start, or just in case you think like all the chain rule problems are going to be as tricky as the last one we did. So let's just take a look at question number 1 here. So if f is sine of 2x, how can I find f prime of x? So I'm going to recommend your first few times through, you try to think of one of those two notations for the chain rule and actually write it out and see what you find. So I'm going to write there that f of x is sine of 2x. So I'm going to think of that as, pick whatever letters you want, g of h of x, where g of x is sine of x, and h of x, the inside function, is 2x. So f prime of x is going to be the derivative of the outside, so g prime, with the inside the same, times the derivative of the inside function. So f prime of x here, g prime, what's the derivative of g? Well, g was sine of x, this is going to be cosine of, the inside should stay the same, the inside was 2x, times h prime of x. Well, if h of x is 2x, then h prime of x is 2. This is a great answer, but notice if you're taking the multiple choice test, that's going to be simplified. The more normal notation for that is 2 cosine 2x. Feel free to try some of these if you like. If you want to wait till we get to class tomorrow, we'll see you then.